Hi and welcome back to the channel. I'm Steven, today with a lens review. So this is a lens where, in my opinion, every Nikon Z mirrorless users should own. Everyone needs to buy one. So here we are today with the Nikon Z40mm f2. At the time of recording, this is a lens that goes for anywhere between $200 to $250. Sometimes there are rebates or discounts depending on your country and your region. This lens, until today, is my most used lens ever. I've used it on Nikon Z30, ZFC, Z6 and also Z8 even. I have used this lens for literally everything. The occasional landscape, street photography, which this is best for, and documenting virtually anything, including making videos. Another cheaper option is the Viltrox 40mm f2.5. Even though the Viltrox lens is a sharper lens than this one, not by much, but the Viltrox is sharper, I will take f2 over f2.5 any day. But that is just me, by the way. Okay, so before we move on to the image quality, a quick mention about the build of this lens. This is very plastic for sure, but it feels like high quality plastic. It does not feel like those cheap Yongnuo DSLR lenses from 10 years ago, in case you're familiar with those, because I am. So those feel like they would self-destruct at any point, not this. This feels very solid, very well built. And yes, this is something a lot of people will complain, plastic mount. For me, not important, because this is a lens that is so small and light, about 200 grams, a lens that I just toss it into my bag whenever I go out. I just don't care whether I will use it or not. I just toss it in because it weighs nothing, and that means it does not stress the camera mount or the lens mount that much when you plug it onto your camera. I think my lens over here is the living proof of it. I've been using this lens for 4 to 5 years. I screw and unscrew this lens from my camera so many times that I've lost count, and the mount is still intact. Yes, there are indeed people out there who break the plastic mount of their camera lenses. It is common with kit lenses especially. I don't know how they do it. But in my opinion, they shouldn't break that easily, regardless of which lens and which camera brand. These things are robust enough unless you abuse it. On the front, there is a 52mm filter thread, where I have used it to screw on this hood on. This hood is not included in the box. It is something I purchased separately from the Chinese shopping website Taobao. A very cheap metal lens hood over here to protect the front of the lens. There is a filter thread on the hood itself, so all is good over here. So overall, this is a very simple lens. No switches on the side to toggle between AF and MF. Very annoying. One more thing, no weather sealing, and also no water repellent coating on the front of the lens. I did notice a major difference actually. Sometimes I get water splashed on the front of my lens, like I'm near a fountain or a waterfall and there are some small splashes on it. Or sometimes I get my fingerprints on the front of the lens and it is a little bit harder to clean compared to my other more expensive lenses with water repellent coating on the front. Moving on to autofocus, this is where this lens punches way above its weight and price point. It surprised me even the first time I bought it and used it. This lens is fully internal focusing. None of the lens, be it the front or the rear, moves when you focus it. It is quite well sealed actually, even though there is no weather sealing on paper. Meanwhile, me, who owns Canon gear as well, the 50mm 1.8 or even the RF35 non-L, the 85 f2 macro as well, those are $500 lenses and they have an externally focusing group. Yeah, the front of the lens will move back and forth during focusing, and that is one thing I absolutely hate, regardless of the price point of the lens. Number one, it can suck in dust a lot more easily compared to a fully sealed lens. And number two, this is even more important, you could potentially damage the lens by accident if you are not careful. For example, if you are putting a filter on the lens, an ND filter for example, ideally you will want to turn off the autofocus. You need to switch to MF before you try to screw any filter on it. Otherwise, the camera could be trying to focus on something and then you're twisting the front of the lens trying to put a filter on, and that might damage the AF motor. It is a huge hassle to remind myself to turn off AF before I touch the front of the lens. And the AF is so quiet that if you are using your own camera microphone to record video, not that you should do that, you will hardly hear anything in the video. Not to mention, it is actually pretty quick, pretty fast. Maybe because it is a very light lens, there are not many elements inside, so the AF motor does not have to work as hard. And then moving on to image quality. This feels like the good old Nifty 50. Yeah, I mean DSLR lenses of the past, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where wide open at f2, the center of the image is sharp, but the corners are blurrier, obviously. And then as you stop down to f2.8, f4 and so on, the corners will slowly become sharper, and they are the sharpest at around f5 to 5.6. At the same time, even when you hit maximum sharpness at f5.6 or so, the lens will not match the sharpness of a Nikon S-line lens. Yeah, they are not comparable at all. The bokeh quality on this lens is actually not bad, quite nice, but most of the time bokeh is also dependent on what kind of environment you are shooting in. If there is very harsh lighting in the middle of the day, then you might see some bright highlights around the bokeh circles. The best part about this lens is that there is no cat's eye bokeh. The bokeh circles are round all the way to the corners. Very interesting, where more expensive lenses will have cat's eye bokeh instead. The probable reason over here is the moderate aperture of f2 combined with a relatively small optical design, so there is no need to bend light that much before it hits the sensors. Meanwhile, even though Nikon claims that this lens has 7 rounded aperture blades, when you stop down enough, you can still get a heptagonal shape bokeh. Is it a problem? Not really, just that I find it interesting that even rounded blades are not enough to stop this from happening. Moving on to vignetting or dark corners. Based on what I'm seeing with my own eyes, it is not like I have a test chart. I am estimating around 2 stops or 2.3 stops, wide open and f2, and then it slowly reduces as you stop down to 2.8, f4 and so on. For me, a vignette of 1 to 1.5 stops is acceptable at those smaller apertures because personally, I like my images to have a slightly darker corner. You know, it helps in composition. It draws in the viewer's eyes into whatever the subject is in the middle. So I like slightly dark corners, but not 2 stops dark. So I would say the vignetting performance is just average on this lens. Could have been better, but at this price point, not complaining. As for distortion, is there even any distortion? I don't remember. Automatically corrected in camera and in Lightroom. Especially on a 40mm lens, I think distortion is not that big of a concern. And then moving on to chromatic aberration or color fringing. I mean, if you do a stress test, then you might see a little bit of it. As usual with this kind of lenses, it reduces as you stop down from f2 to 2.8 to 4 and so on. I wouldn't worry too much about it. And moving on to the last part, which is flare performance. Not the best thing I've used. There is some flare, not necessarily a bad thing. There is good flare and bad flare, right? There is such a thing. And I would say the flare on this lens is more of the good kind, right? Not too intrusive, doesn't degrade the image quality as much. You can work around it. This is a must-have lens for every Nikon Z shooter. Unless you insist on getting the Viltrox f2.5, of course. That is an excellent alternative. Yeah, I'm looking for something a little bit better, like maybe up to 2.5 or 3 times the price of this thing, which is still $500, $600, then you can take a look at the newer Nikon 35 1.4. That is $599 brand new, though if you wait for the market prices, I mean the street prices to drop a little bit, maybe one day you can get that lens for $500, which would be quite the bargain to get for a 1.4 lens. Yes, and obviously for third parties, there are more options out there. Viltrox 35 f1.8, and then there is the... what else do we have? There are many options out there from third parties, especially Chinese brands. But anyways, this is not a bad lens at all. If you are considering one, in fact, pick one up. I'm glad that Nikon made their Nifty 50 a 40 instead, because it feels like 40mm is a lot more versatile than 50mm, at least according to some people, to me as well. I like photographing products where longer focal length is better. I would prefer 50 over 40, but if I'm taking my camera out on the streets to capture random moments, 40 or 35mm works better. And this is why this lens is so versatile for both photo and video. I highly recommend it. And that is all for today's lens review on Nikon Z40mm f2. If you found this review helpful or informative, please give this video a like, subscribe to this channel, and help this channel grow. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you guys again very soon. Goodbye.